I'm a huge Nintendo fan, but we all know they have a reputation for hammering the law. So that's why in this video, I'm going to be ranking every Nintendo lawsuit by how dumb they are. I'm valid because I'm wearing a suit. I clearly know what I'm talking about. Even though there were several times that Nintendo was the defendant, we're only going to be looking at times where Nintendo was the one that was suing an individual or company. So without further ado, let's dive in. In 1999, when video game rentals were popular, Blockbuster emerged as a major video game rental company, allowing gamers to rent NES games. Nintendo was concerned that video game rentals could negatively impact their physical game sales. However, they couldn't legally challenge rentals due to the first sale doctrine, which permits the rental of legally purchased physical copies. Instead of directly attacking the rental model, Nintendo decided to sue Blockbuster over the reproduction of instruction manuals that came with the games. You see, many customers frequently lost, damaged, or failed to return these instruction manuals when they returned the rented game. To address this issue, Blockbuster began photocopying the original instruction manuals and including those copies with the rented games. While Blockbuster was legally allowed to rent games under the first sale doctrine, the instruction manuals were considered separate copyrighted works, and Nintendo had not given Blockbuster permission to reproduce them. Ultimately, the court ruled in favor of Nintendo, requiring Blockbuster to purchase legitimate copies of the manuals directly from Nintendo. I completely understand why Nintendo didn't like rentals, as this directly affects their game sales. When thousands of people can play their game without purchasing them, the perceived value of those games diminishes. Given the rental price, players might view these games as less valuable than they truly are. If I was in Nintendo's position, I'd probably want to stop this as well. This is a significant reason why video game companies push for players to buy digital copies of their games these days. Just look at how many sales are lost to secondhand purchases at stores like GameStop. Rentals from places like Blockbuster definitely impacted the revenue that Nintendo thought they deserved, and I understand their concerns. However, their decision to target manuals was a little slimy. How much money would they really be losing from a manual? For that reason, I would rate this situation as kinda mean, but I get it. Also in 1989, when the NES was in its height of popularity, Nintendo filed a lawsuit against Tengen for distributing unlicensed NES games. Question arose: how was Tengen able to bypass Nintendo's copyrighted lockout chip, which was a digital security system integrated into the NES and its licensed game cartridges? Tengen obtained the chip's code from the US Copyright Office by lying. Tengen's lawyer claimed that he needed a copy for legal reasons and to analyze the lockout chip better to understand the case. However, their true intention was to reverse engineer the code so that they could figure out how to bypass the NES lockout system and create unlicensed games. As a result, the courts ruled in favor of Nintendo, affirming their right to control their platform. They literally lied so that they could sell pirated copies of the games. We all saw this coming. In a separate legal matter, Tengen released an NES version of Tetris based on a sub-licensing agreement. However, Nintendo, which held exclusive console rights from the game's owner, successfully sued Tengen to stop sales, ultimately forcing the company to recall its Tetris cartridges. Once again, Tengen was a donut head. They literally sold a game that wasn't theirs. And once again, we all saw that coming. Also in 1989, Nintendo took Magnavox and Sanders Associates to court over two important video game patents that Magnavox owned. Magnavox had made a lot of money by letting other companies use their technology, specifically the one that allowed a video game to be displayed and interacted with on a color TV screen. Nintendo, which was starting to dominate the video game market with the NES, didn't like that the Magnavox was controlling such crucial technology and licensing it out for a fee. So Nintendo challenged these patents, arguing that Magnavox had obtained them dishonestly. They also claimed that Magnavox was having secret meetings with the US Patent and Trademark Office to influence the process. But the court didn't agree with Nintendo. They ruled in favor of Magnavox, deciding that there wasn't enough solid evidence to prove that Magnavox had intentionally done anything wrong. They believe that while Magnavox made some mistakes, like forgetting to update the Patent and Trademark Office about a patent, these were just errors and not attempts to deceive anyone. So Magnavox won the legal case and the patents remained in their hands, allowing them to continue collecting licensing fees from companies that wanted to use that early video game technology. To be honest, it was a little bit of a weak argument from Nintendo, and they should have probably just done a little bit more research before entering a legal war. They must have been wearing some silly pants. But this is just the beginning. It only gets crazier from here. Like in 1991, Nintendo sued Louis Galoob Toys, the makers of game Genie. Who in the world would be named Galoob? That's just a horrific name. And if that's your name, well then I'm sorry. The game Genie was a device designed to be inserted into the NES that allowed players to enter cheat codes, altering their gameplay, such as gaining infinite lives or jumping higher temporarily, like this. Nintendo argued that the game Genie created unauthorized derivative works by changing the appearance, behavior, or experience of its games, and that these modifications effectively created new games. However, because the changes were only temporary and controlled by the player, the court ruled that these temporary alterations did not constitute copyright infringement, allowing the game Genie to remain on the market. This is dumb, mainly because the players have already purchased the game. While it is true that changes are being made to the game, the fact remains that the player had already bought it through Nintendo. It would be a different case if they were trying to emulate or play it illegally, but since they are the rightful owners, I don't see any harm with this modification. So this lawsuit seems quite silly. I'm putting this in silly pants. In 1983, a company called NTDEC, short for Nintendo Electronics Co., was founded in Taiwan. This wasn't Nintendo, and they called themselves Nintendo. Red flag alert, hello. They decided to pump out unlicensed NES and Famicom games. But they didn't just make pirated games, they also created game converters that allowed players to use Famicom cartridges on the NES systems. NTDEC's bootlegging wasn't just limited to a few titles either. They were involved in mass producing counterfeit games, which they sold across Asia and North America. They even had the audacity to slap their own name on the cartridge and even replace in-game copyright notices with their own. Oh, they also added the quality guarantee logo because they drank extra moron potion that day, I guess. Obviously, Nintendo wasn't going to let this slide, and in 1991, 2 NTDEC employees got busted in the US for trafficking bootleg cartridges. Nintendo followed up with a lawsuit hitting the NTDEC hard for copyright infringement and suing them over the use of Nintendo in their game. Who could have seen that coming? By 1993, Nintendo won big. NTDEC was ordered to cough up $24 million in damages and was shut down for good. Good job, Nintendo. This whole situation is absolutely insane. Not only did they ship out a ton of games that they said was theirs, but they also claimed to be Nintendo, technically. This is actually mind-bogglingly stupid. That's our first mind-bogglingly stupid tier, but trust me, there's more. In 1998, Nintendo found itself in a bizarre domain name dispute with a man named Ron Harris. What could possibly be the problem? Harris owned the domain Zelda.com, but instead of hosting walkthroughs and tips for The Legend of Zelda, the site redirected visitors to, well, let's just say, adult content. Nintendo's family-friendly franchise was now unintentionally redirecting people to this 18-plus website. Nintendo remained adamant that the use of Zelda.com was tarnishing their brand, even though, you know, clearly they don't care anymore. Have you seen the eShop lately? And not only that, but at the same time, Nintendo was marketing The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, which caused traffic to Zelda.com to skyrocket. Parents and gamers were continuing to stumble upon Zelda.com, only to find themselves navigating a maze of pop-ups and icky content. That's probably what they were like. I couldn't find any information on who actually won this, but we can assume that Nintendo did because if you go to Zelda.com today, it's literally Nintendo's website. I had to just check just to make sure for content. So Nintendo won. This makes sense. In 1999, Nintendo filed a lawsuit against Kinetics Corp, the developers of the Virtual Game Station, also known as the VGS, which was a PlayStation emulator designed for Mac. Yes, Nintendo sued a PlayStation emulator. But why? The reason lies in reverse engineering, which involves disassembling software to understand how it functions. This process was essential for developing emulators like the VGS. Nintendo was concerned that if they could reverse engineer the PlayStation, what was stopping them from doing that with Nintendo's consoles? And they claimed that these techniques violated their copyright. But at the same time Nintendo was launching their lawsuit, Sony had already initiated their own legal action. Initially, Sony won the case. And ultimately, the courts ruled that reverse engineering used to make systems work together falls under fair use, which completely undermined Nintendo's position as well. Ultimately, Sony acquired the VGS in 2001, which effectively resolved the issue. This lawsuit looks like a colossal waste of time and resources, especially since Nintendo had no direct stake in the VGS. The irony of their case falling apart after Sony's defeat only adds to the ridiculousness. This was mind-bogglingly stupid. In 1999, Nintendo took legal action against a Hong Kong-based company called Bung Enterprise, which was selling devices that allowed people to copy Nintendo games illegally. These devices helped users bypass the need to buy original games. Bung Enterprises even went so far as to smuggle the device into the US and mislabeling them to avoid detection. They had no permission to use Nintendo's games or trademarks, but they sold the device anyway. Nintendo wasn't about to let this slide though. They sued Bung for violating copyright laws, using Nintendo's trademarks without permission, and unfairly competing by selling piracy tools. The court quickly sided with Nintendo, ruling that Bung's device violated copyright by letting users copy and alter games. Bung's device also broke Nintendo's security system, which was built to prevent piracy, making their actions to a DMCA violation as well. However, we can't overlook Mr. James Burt. While casually shopping, he came across a copy of New Super Mario Bros. Wii, well before its official release date. While finding the game early wasn't his fault or the issue, the problem arose when he returned home and was persuaded by people online to upload the ROM to the internet, just to prove that he had it. As a result, over 50,000 people were able to play the game for free before its release. Nintendo took legal action against Burt, and they identified him as the original uploader using digital watermarking and other tracking technologies embedded in the game's files. This technology allowed Nintendo to trace the pirated copy back to Burt's specific upload. Nintendo filed a lawsuit against Burt, citing substantial financial losses due to the game's unauthorized distribution. They argued that the leaked game led to significant revenue loss from people downloading the pirated version instead of purchasing it legally. Burt was ordered to pay approximately $1.3 million in damages to Nintendo. This includes compensation for the lost sales and legal fees incurred by Nintendo. Burt also reportedly had to cover the cost of removing the pirated content from the web. The lawsuit made sense. Not only was Nintendo completely justified, but they wanted to maintain the sales for the new game. I'm putting this situation in silly pants, because even though he had the game, why in the world would he dump it? Nintendo might have gone a little too hard, but they just wanted to make an example of him, which we'll learn didn't really work that well. Then we enter the quiet years for Nintendo. That is until in 2017, when they filed a lawsuit against a Japanese company named Maricar, which operated a go-kart rental service in Tokyo. This service allowed customers to drive go-karts on public streets while dressed as characters from the Mario Kart series. Nintendo claimed that this constituted an infringement on its intellectual property and that Maricar's activities created confusion, making it seem as though Nintendo was directly associated with the company. In 2018, the court ruled in favor of Nintendo, deciding that Maricar's name and costumes represented trademark infringement. The court ordered Maricar to pay Nintendo $90,000 in damages. However, Nintendo was not satisfied with that number, and in 2020, they successfully appealed the ruling, resulting in Maricar being required to pay nearly $500,000 instead. The balls on Maricar must have been massive. First of all, the name is obviously incredibly similar to Nintendo's game Mario Kart. Mario Kart is just short form Mario Kart. Bruh. It's clear that they use Nintendo's popular franchise to market this, even though that's clearly not allowed. I believe this became particularly concerning for Nintendo as they were preparing to launch an official Mario Kart attraction at Universal Studios, which is also located in Japan. Nintendo likely wanted to stop this immediately to ensure that this event wasn't associated with their attraction and to distance themselves, especially when something goes wrong. Bruh! Yes, that actually happened, and it made headlines, which is exactly what they don't want. What's really funny is that they're still going, operating under a new name and still has a pop culture theme. I've always wanted to drive in a go-kart in Tokyo as a minion. This is just a dumb lawsuit overall and mind-bogglingly stupid. But in 2018, Nintendo filed a lawsuit against two popular ROM sites, Love ROMs and Love Retro, both of which hosted Nintendo games that users could download and play with emulators. Nintendo accused these sites for brazen and mass-scale infringement. The courts ruled in favor of Nintendo, ordering the defendants to pay $12 million in damages. Holy smokes, ladies and gentlemen. Oh my goodness gracious. This decision created apprehension among other ROM sites, leading Emu Paradise, a similar website, to remove all of its Nintendo content as well. This lawsuit makes complete sense. While one could argue that if people can't play the game, then it should be fair to go online and emulate them. Well, no, because those are still Nintendo's games, and if they ever decided to resell them or remake them, they'd be losing sales in that regard. So if I were in Nintendo's position, I'd probably do the same thing. It's a smart move on their part. Everyone saw this coming. Now, what about the time Nintendo had a little bit of conflict with everyone's favorite rapper, Soulja Boy? For some reason, one day he decided to sell a cheap Game Boy ripoff known as the Retro Soulja Boy Minis. These were simply just Game Boy knockoffs. These knockoffs had official Nintendo games on them. This was obviously a big no. Now, I should clarify, they never actually sued him. They just threatened him and he immediately stopped selling them. That's a silly pants moment right there. In 2019, the Pokémon Company filed a lawsuit against two individuals who leaked images from an unreleased strategy guide for Pokémon Sword and Shield. These images were shared online before the game's official release, spoiling key features like Gigantamax forms and evolutions. But why was the Pokémon Company so furious? Well, this was because the defendants weren't just casual fans who stumbled upon something juicy. They were employees of a company hired to print the strategy guide. Instead of doing their jobs, they snapped some pictures at work and shared them on Discord. Bruh. The Pokémon company claimed that these leaks caused irreparable injury to their brand, ruining the hype that they had carefully built around the games. They took the matter to court, and justice finally landed like a hyper beam. Pokémon reference. Hyper beam. Both defendants were slapped with a $150,000 penalty, each for damages and legal fees. Here's the thing though, this whole ordeal feels a little bit over the top. Sure, the leaks were a breach of trust, but the game still went on to sell millions of copies. The Pokémon brand didn't exactly crumble in the dust. Was the punishment harsh? Absolutely. Did it make an example out of these two? You bet. But whether it actually protected the carefully cultivated excitement is up for debate. But regardless, this makes sense in the end through my eyes. And once again, my eyes are correct, because I'm wearing a suit. In 2019, Nintendo filed a lawsuit against ROM Universe, a website that offered unauthorized downloads of Nintendo games, including titles for the Switch and 3DS. ROM Universe even had a $30 paid membership program that allowed users to download games more quickly and in larger quantities. The site, along with its owner Matthew Storman, distributed hundreds of thousands of pirated games made by Nintendo, including popular titles like Super Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild. In 2021, the courts ruled in favor of Nintendo, leading to the shutdown of the site and ordering Storman to pay $2.1 million in damages, despite Storman being unemployed and filing for bankruptcy. So in this case, yes, he was doing something very stupid, and he should have seen this coming. But the court documents actually show that he was only generating $30,000 to $36,000 from ROMUniverse.com a year, and his monthly income was about $800 a month before he shut it off. Other than that, his only source of income at the time was unemployment and food stamps. So Nintendo having him pay $2.1 million is actually kind of insane. This case is legally solid, but Nintendo's refusal to ease up on the penalties make them look unnecessarily harsh, I think. It was kind of mean, but I get it. In 2022, Nintendo took legal action against notorious hacking group Team Executor. Team Executor was known for developing hardware and software tools that allowed users to bypass Nintendo's security measures and play pirated games. This group became a significant threat to Nintendo's business model, as it directly impacted the sales of both games and consoles. The first lawsuit Nintendo filed in 2020 targeted a reseller website called Uber Chips, which was involved in distributing these piracy tools. As a result of this legal action, Uber Chips was ordered to pay $2 million in damages. Nintendo also filed a second lawsuit against 9 additional websites, which were similarly selling Team Executor's piracy devices. While this might have sucked for the modding community, this makes sense from Nintendo's point of view. And in 2021, Nintendo escalated their legal efforts by targeting one of Team Executor's key members, Gary Bowser. Yes, that's his real legal name. And he has no connection to Doug Bowser, the president of Nintendo America. Oh, you know, Bowser. But hey, maybe they can bond over their love of stealing things. This Bowser orchestrated a piracy scheme. As a final blow to Team Executor, Nintendo filed a lawsuit against Gary Bowser and 2 other key members, with Gary Bowser being the group's public face. This time the FBI and Homeland Security got involved and charged him with conspiracy to circumvent technological measures and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Essentially, he sold devices that bypassed security measures to the Switch, which once again stole profits from Nintendo. He ultimately was sent for 40 months in prison, which is over 3 years, and was ordered to pay $14.5 million in restitution. He was able to make it out in 14 months because he was a good boy, although he's gone on record of saying he probably won't ever be able to pay Nintendo back. Once again, the case shows Nintendo's no-nonsense approach to piracy, so this makes sense. We've now reached one of the most expensive lawsuits on our list. During the early days of mainstream arcade games, Japanese game developers faced significant challenges due to a flawed patent system. This system allowed anyone to patent any feature of a game, regardless of whether they were the manufacturer or not. As a result, game developers felt compelled to patent nearly everything to avoid lawsuits. Despite the pressure, a code of honor developed within the industry, where companies chose not to sue each other and instead shared ideas for their mutual benefit. This unwritten agreement was broken by a company called Colopl. I'll just call them Colopl, a Japanese mobile game developer, when it patented a control scheme and attempted to charge other developers for its use. The problem arose because this control scheme was not uniquely theirs. In fact, Nintendo had patented a very similar control scheme for games like Super Mario 64 DS. In 2016, Nintendo approached Colopl privately, claiming infringement on multiple patents. After a year of unsuccessful negotiations, Nintendo filed a lawsuit against Colopl, seeking approximately $29 million in damages. Over several years, Colopl made adjustments to its games to avoid infringing on Nintendo's patents. However, Nintendo continued to cite additional instances of patent infringement just to rub dirt in the wound, ultimately claiming that Colopl had violated 5 more patents beyond the joystick patent that we talked about with Super Mario 64. As a result, they raised their price from $29 $49 million to $66 million. Eventually, Colopl decided to settle the legal battle to avoid further escalation, and in return, Nintendo allowed Colopl to keep its games available on app stores. This lawsuit is actually so stupid and expensive. Like, how dumb can you be violating multiple patents and at the same time attack someone else for doing the exact same thing you're doing? Once again, bruh. It's such a blatant case of hypocrisy, it's almost comical. Not only are you doing the same offense, but you're drawing attention to it by pointing your finger at someone else. Still, this isn't the dumbest I've seen, and it's just a silly pants lawsuit. Next, the Pokemon company sued an Australian crypto company called Pokemon Pty. I'll just call it Party because that's what it looks like, for illegally using Pokemon characters in an NFT game called Palworld. Pokemon Party falsely claimed that they have worked on official Pokemon projects and created a game where players could use Pokemon to battle, earn cryptocurrency, and trade NFT items like clothing and food. The game also boasted about taking care of Pokemon as virtual pets, but it was all unauthorized. Obviously, the Pokemon company learned about this when Pokemon Party started promoting the game on social media, claiming it was official. In court, Pokemon Party didn't even show up, and that kind of silence says a lot. The court ruled against them, and they were banned from using Pokemon characters, making Pokemon NFTs, or pretending that they were connected to the Pokemon company at all. They put an end to the Pokéworld game idea, and it's safe to say Pokéworld won't be evolving any further. There's so much to say about this one. They were just stupid. They literally had Pokemon in their company name and claiming they were official Pokemon. This is mind-bogglingly stupid. Next, we have a smaller case where Nintendo sued DStorage, which owned a file hosting service. The court found DStorage liable for hosting unauthorized copies of Nintendo games and failing to remove them upon notification. DStorage was ordered to pay just under $500,000 in damages and legal fees. It's not a case that raises many eyebrows in terms of how Nintendo handled it, making it more of a defensible action, and was relatively low profile compared to some of Nintendo's other lawsuits. This makes sense. This next one though was a really big deal for the Nintendo Switch community, and that was when Nintendo sued Tropic Haze. In February 2024, Nintendo filed a lawsuit against Tropic Haze LLC, the developers of the Yuzu emulator, alleging that it facilitated large-scale piracy on Nintendo Switch games. Nintendo claimed that Yuzu enabled users to play pirated copies of games, including over 1 million unauthorized downloads of The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, prior to the official release. By March 2024, Tropic Haze agreed to a settlement, consenting to pay Nintendo $2.4 million in damages and to cease all development and distribution of the Yuzu emulator, as well as the 3DS emulator, Citra. This is a really interesting case. The emulator in question was a very popular emulator and had been around for a long time. The tipping point seemed to be when they allowed people to play The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom early, which led to significant loss in potential sales. This reaction from Nintendo made sense to me, even if it might be a little bit of an unpopular opinion. Not only did the emulator give people early access to games when they leaked, but it also allowed them to achieve a more stable frame rate and upscale graphics. This was particularly attractive to those who weren't really liking the Nintendo Switch hardware, which I get is old and bad and outdated. Personally, I'm not an emulation guy and I wasn't affected by this, so I don't know, it never really mattered to me. There's even some speculation in the community following the settlement, as Nintendo now owns the URL and overall branding for Yuzu, that Nintendo may want to leverage the technology behind emulating games for their own benefit, given that the successor to the Nintendo Switch will now play games that are backwards compatible. This could somehow be related. We don't know yet. I don't know. This is just what people have said. Regardless, it has arguably hurt the Switch community as a whole. And for this reason, it's mean, but I get it. Now, I'm sure you've heard about this next one. Nintendo's legal dispute with Pocket Pair, the developers behind Palworld. Nintendo and the Pokemon Company are seeking to halt all sales of the game and are demanding over $65,000 in damages. Interestingly, they are suing for patent infringement, which suggests that Pocket Pair has kept their designs different enough from Pokemon, prompting Nintendo to find an alternative reason to pursue this lawsuit. This situation kind of reminds me of the previous Blockbuster case, where Nintendo was dissatisfied with companies renting their own games. They couldn't directly sue those companies, so they did some digging and found a different legal avenue to challenge them. While this approach might seem questionable, it is quite common in the corporate culture. Once again, I know because I'm wearing a suit. If Pocket Pair had copied Pokemon designs outright, Nintendo would have likely opted for the significant copyright lawsuit instead. And we saw that firsthand when a modder put actual Pokemon in Palworld. They got that mod taken down. That's just proof. Anyway, let's keep going. The specific patents in questions involve in-game mechanics, such as aiming and throwing balls, and also riding the pals. It's commendable that Pocket Pair is standing their grounds, as taking on Nintendo can't be an easy feat. It'll be interesting to see how this situation develops. Now, this one is tricky to rank because Nintendo is operating within its legal rights, but appears to be targeting a smaller competitor over what many would consider fairly basic gameplay mechanics. The fact that it's a patent infringement case rather than a copyright case gives Nintendo a stronger legal footing. But the reality of going after an indie developer over similarities to Pokemon doesn't really sit well with the public. Some would argue that Nintendo's action feels somewhat overprotective, especially since the mechanics in question are hardly revolutionary and has been done in several other games. However, it's clear that Nintendo is intent on protecting what it views as valuable intellectual property, and that's a defensible position. After all, the reason that this game gained so much popularity is because people have been calling it Pokemon with guns. It's no surprise that Nintendo wants to put an end to this publicity. In fact, I would say the issue is less about the game mechanics and more about Nintendo wanting to ensure that people, especially parents, don't perceive this as an actual Pokemon game. Just take a look at some of these creatures in the game. Sometimes I find it hard to remember which ones are which. Additionally, we can't ignore that from a quality standpoint, this game appears to be significantly better than even Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Overall, it's quite justifiable for Nintendo to protect the Pokemon franchise as a whole. However, it does look unfavorable for such a massive video game corporation to take action against a indie developer, who is ironically named Pocket Pair, similar to Pocket Monsters, which is what Pokemon is. Perhaps they should have taken a little bit more of a discreet approach. Literally Pokeballs versus Palaspheres. Once again, bruh. Next we got quite the silly boy, Jesse Keegan, aka Every Game Guru. Jesse Keegan decided to do one of the dumbest things possible and not only stream pirated Nintendo games, stream multiple unreleased pirated Nintendo games, like Super Mario RPG and even the most recent Mario & Luigi Brothership. And it was on some bizarre streaming platforms that no one has even heard about, like Trovo, Loco, Picarto, and I saw all the fun ones. He even plastered his Cash App QR code on the screen like a complete dummy brain. Apparently he's been doing this since 2012 and has streamed pirated games on 50 separate occasions. Even after Nintendo took down his content, he'd just make another account and keep going. He even sent a message to Nintendo bragging that he had over 1,000 burner accounts. Nintendo, of course, is returning fire with a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, which they will win, and he will join Gary Bowser to pay off Nintendo for the rest of his life. This one clearly goes in mind-bogglingly stupid. In a recent lawsuit, the Pokemon company won around $15 million after taking a Chinese company to court for stealing their intellectual property. The case was about a mobile game called Pocket Monster Reissue, which was basically a ripoff of Pokemon. The game used characters like Pikachu and Ash Ketchum, copying them directly from the official Pokemon artwork. The app icon even featured Pikachu's image straight from the Pokemon Yellow game cover. Despite being a blatant copy, the game was successful and made over $42 million in its first year. The court ruled in favor of the Pokemon Company, ordering the creators of Pocket Monster Reissue to pay around $15 million in damages. There were also a few companies involved in the case who were also found guilty, though they appealed the decision. I'm actually surprised Nintendo went so easy on them, considering how much money they made from the game. Regardless, this was blatantly dumb and mind-bogglingly stupid. It's important to note that I might have missed a few lawsuits here, as there were a lot, and some have been lost to time. Also, some lawsuits, companies sign NDAs, and it's not even known in the public. Check out this video to see the sad state of Pokemon on Nintendo Switch. Please consider becoming a channel member to support me, liking and subscribing. I'll see you in the next one. See you later.